Welcome back to Flashback Files. I'm Josh Green. Here on this podcast, we are dedicated to helping students and young adults reflect on how early experiences shape confidence, identity, and leadership. Today's guest is someone I've known since we were kids, literally since we were 7. Growing up, Tom was one of those people who somehow managed to do everything: school, sports, music, friends, without burning out or losing himself in the process. Or at least that's what I saw. Maybe we'll learn a little bit differently. That balance carried into adulthood, where Tom studied engineering and management, and over the years has built a career across manufacturing, tech, and operations, working at companies like BlackBerry, Husky Technologies, Organogram, and now Atlantic Packaging. Today, he's a senior finance leader, but what makes his story relevant isn't the title, it's how his career evolved. There wasn't one perfect plan. It was a series of learning curves, adjustments, and decisions that added up over time. So if you're in your late teens or early 20s and feeling pressure to have your career figured out, this conversation may be for you. I'm excited to welcome my longtime friend, Tom, to Flashback Files. Tom, I went through your resume. Welcome to the show. As I mentioned, we're lifelong friends. Before we get into more the career side of things, can you maybe just take a moment to tell people who you are as a person outside of work, what your hobbies are, family life, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so thank you for having me. I appreciate it. You made me feel really good by inviting me to be part of this podcast today. Yeah, I mean, other than work, I mean, I have a wife, I have 2 kids. I think as I've gotten older, my life revolves around those 2 kids at all times. They're starting to get into sports and extracurricular activity. So it's pretty interesting as you talk about that. We met each other at the age of 7 at a kind of, I think, in a critical time of lives as we were growing up. I think my kids are at that exact same point right now. And I know you have the same thing. So I think this is a great opportunity for us to discuss some of those things that maybe as younger children, as we went through our careers and life, that have helped us as we got to the point where we are right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to maybe illustrate for the listeners. So this has been a 36-year friendship. So Tom and I shared some pretty critical milestones, including being at each other's weddings, seeing each other have children of their own, and then also seeing our kids play together. So it's a really neat experience coming from 7-year-old kids to actually having our kids playing together. But yeah, so let's get into it. So when we think about, start off with a little bit of nostalgia and friendship back in grade 2. Do you remember the first version of yourself or us as grade 2 individual at a new school?
Yeah, I remember, I remember coming to school in grade 2. I just moved in Hamilton to a new school. I remember that, from me and you perspective, I think we clicked right away. I mean, obviously, I think you were always, the star of the crowd. And I think I gravitated towards you. But at the same time, I think we got along all the time. I think it was sports. I think a critical thing that we've always had together is imagination. We think about things and we try to make it happen. But yeah, it's interesting. You do have that period was such a long time ago. And from all the years, you used a number, which is pretty high, 36 years. But it's interesting to go back and reflect. But I always just remember that you were part of all the bigger moments of my life as it's gone by.
Yeah, and it's funny how simple things at the age of 7, like playing at recess and bonding over being on a dodgeball team together or kick baseball. If I remember correctly, we're on the Pirates kick baseball team and we won the championship. I might be wrong, but
Yeah.
My memory might be incorrect, but just the small sports things that came up throughout our lives. And then now we're like serious milestones that we've been able to witness for each other. So when you think about those early days, and maybe some of the traits that you had back then, what's still visible in you now? Like you did make a reference to imagination. Is there anything else that stands out, that like a trait that you innately had younger that still shows up today?
Yeah, I think imagination being one of them. I mean, I think, you know, as an kids have the greatest imagination in the world. I think adults keeping that as they grow older is critical. I also think, I've always related it back to kind of, the Robert Munch books we used to read as a kid. Imagination, humor, and relationships. Those things are super critical at a young age. And if you were doing that young and as you're doing it as you're growing up, I think it is so valuable to you as an adult to have those skills. And I'll point to particularly like the relationship side of, people and being, building relationships with people. That's one of the most important, traits that you can have. And that all starts at a young age.
Yeah, I think that's a great point in terms of protecting the relationships that you start early on. I think our circle of friends have done a good job in terms of sustaining relationships or friendships before the career versions of ourselves show up. I can't speak for you, but I know for me, it's been like I've been a little hesitant striking solid friendships outside of my core group in school because of the fact that it's almost like I had a career mask on in the early 20s, at least. Whereas like I know you and Jay and Jimmy and Sammy know me for who I am as a person, as a kid, which I think goes a long way. And the other point that I think was really cool that you brought up was keeping that imagination in adulthood. It's sometimes difficult to protect that imagination as logic shows up. And as people tell you that, oh, you can't do things as you get older, you got to think about responsibilities. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I'm going to give an example that we recently had was when you'll remember this is we went and played bocce ball together and there was a champion and there was a winner of the bocce ball tournament that we had. We created an Olympic style ceremony to honor the winner, the second place and the third place. And we made sure that the last place was also part of this ceremony in that they understood that they came in last place. And I thought, that was using our imaginations. We were thinking about, okay, how are we going to make this possible? And
Yeah.
when you think about something and you believe, it always comes. I'm a big proponent of that.
Yeah, that's a great example. So growing up, I always saw you as someone who balanced everything well. So when did you notice that you approach life with that kind of that appetite to have balance? So for people that don't know you, you dabbled in the music department, in the band and sports and friendships, and you also excelled academically. Can you help me understand what allowed you to even balance all of those things? Was it an initial appetite to do it? Was it a reactive thing where you were asked just to do all the things and you just chose to do them?
Yeah, I don't think I ever noticed that. I mean, you called it out. Other people have said it to me. I think what it is at that time when we were growing up, my parents were first generation immigrants to this country. And they were also first generation immigrants with other families that were from where we are from in India. And there was maybe 40 to 50 families, and they would get together. And I think they were all going through the same thing. And everybody would probably give their tips like, oh, we put my son in piano. You should do that. And we'd be like, okay, oh, our kid is really good at school. That's going to be the way of the future. That's the only way you'll get a job. Oh, you need to excel at school. Oh, we have our kid in soccer. You should play it. And I think, I will give credit to my parents and the community that we were raised of, where they were always trying to make sure that their kids had everything, and we were trying to do a little bit of everything. You know, I don't. I never excelled at something. I was always just with the crowd in all of these different things, but that allowed me to, you know, be able to do those things. And I think you start to take some of the best things from music, from academics, from sports. And I think you put that as part of your life. And I think that's what I've learned from the situation. But I never really, I mean, at the time when you're a kid, you're just doing it. I did realize that I can hang with the music people. I can hang with the academics. I tried to hang with the cool people. So like you were always part of it. So, I mean, it was never something you thought about. I think you were just always, you were just always with these people. And I think yeah, it's just part of the game. That's how I would think.
Yeah. And just as a follow up, in terms of your exposure to those three different disciplines, music, sports, academics, I think you kind of inferred, but did you notice that there were some like some characteristics that you learned in one area that you were able to apply to another?
Oh yeah, like with music, how the way you think when you play an instrument or when you're singing and you apply that to academics and problem solving, that is, that those two go together. When sports, the discipline of practicing every day, going back to the discipline of studying every day, it's all crossed with each other and you take things from one and learn in the other. And if you do it, it's all works together. It's all one big hub and spoke.
Got it. If you were to look back at your 7-year-old self and they saw who you are today, what would surprise the 7-year-old version of you the most?
Yeah, I think you're old. That's what they would say right away. I think as you get older, there's a lot of responsibility that weighs on your shoulders. And I can say that it never goes away. I think it only, especially when you have kids, there's always this, you have this burden on, not burden. There's always a weight on your shoulders. And as a kid, you don't have the weight on your shoulders. Your parents took that weight. So I think, my old self would look at a new one and be like, well, yeah, you're one of those people now, which is, something you need to always try to take the weight off of your shoulders because I think being a kid, that's the best time.
Yeah, absolutely. And even I fast forward to young adult years, there's maybe a little bit more of a burden, but you're touching on something that I've heard from other interviews, which is, yes, we have more responsibility, but still take that chance of enjoying the moment and knowing that the responsibility may just only increase from here, depending on your path and stuff like that. Would you say you had that if we fast forward to the age of 18, that you had that sense of being present, or were you locked in because you did some pretty serious schooling in university?
I think that youthfulness of risk taking, I was always very aware and cognizant. And I think that I've used that to my advantage as I've grown older. Like I'm willing to take some risk in order to get something in the future. I think that's the way I've always been trained. And I think that comes from when I was a kid.
Okay. And I just want to double back on, again, the different things that you dipped your toes in: athletics, music, social life, school. Which of those that I just rhymed off shaped your confidence the most?
Uh, I would say sports. Yeah, I would say sports. It's like winning is, I've been on the worst teams. I've been on teams that have won. And winning, when you win and the confidence that you get, it might not be skills. It's just, working in a team, being on the same page, everyone having that confidence, everyone knowing their part. I think that is one of the best thing that I've ever done. Sports, I think, is always top of my mind in terms of what you can apply from that time during sports to where you are right now in career. I think sports would be the one that sticks out in my mind.
Well, I agree. I think about basketball as an example. We all played on the same basketball team together in high school, and just get the sense of what role you're able to play as a leader or just a teammate, that can be a role player type thing. And it's definitely like a really good, an early snapshot in terms of what an organization that you work for brings and what you
Yeah.
could potentially bring to an organization.
Yeah. There's politics, there's, people, there's the naturally skilled people, there's outside influences, whether it be families, and it's just so much that you can get from sport that can help you later in your career.
Yeah. Did you ever feel pressure to choose a lane? Like, did you ever feel pressure to maybe stop with the sports to focus on academics, particularly as you got closer to maybe considering university and wanting to, optimize your marks and that sort of thing?
Yeah, there was always the like school was always the thing, especially I know from those first generation immigrants, like that was the thing. Get the best marks possible because that is going to get you to become whatever you want to become. What I realized was that's not the case. In fact, the best marks are not what gets you. It's everything you learn during that process to get the best marks. The discipline, the preparation, the collaboration, those things in education are the things that will get you to the next level. The marks is just kind of the destination. How I would think about it is like, hey, you get the best mark on this test, but it's everything learning up to that, getting the best mark on the test is what is actually helping you in real life.
Hmm.
And I think that applies to now. I think when you come out of school, you have this thing of I want to be this, and it has, but you're not really thinking about the journey. And I think that's what's critical about the process. So that's why I think people think that getting the best marks is the best thing in school, but I think it's everything. It's the preparation to get the best marks. That is what is actually the impactful item.
Yeah. So maybe you're just having the presence of mind to know what you're going through and really internalizing it rather than just study, get a mark, study,
Yeah.
get a
Yeah. And unfortunately, I think it's even become more bigger as time has gone by, and I see it a lot in this generation. I'm talking like an old person, but yeah, I see that in this generation because I think that's all people really know. Come here, get good marks, be successful, but it's nothing to do with that.
yeah. I like how you put that. Okay, so just speaking of good marks, you had the marks to get into engineering and management for university. Just a side note, I was going through our middle school yearbook. You did choose doctor as a profession. So you pivoted to engineering and management. So what drew you to the combination of engineering and management and what evolved from choosing a doctor to exploring the engineering management field?
Yeah, I think I'll be honest, at the end of high school, I still thought I wanted to be a doctor. I had no idea how to get there. I just like, once again, I just thought about the end. I was like, doctor, they make a lot of money. That's what you want to be. But I was also, like I said, I was also very cognizant of that I didn't know what I wanted to do. And relating it kind of back to sport, I've always been like a sport and risk. I've always been pretty good with understanding like, hey, I don't know what I want to do. There's if I relate it back to basketball, you know, I try to make the net as big as possible. And I knew at the time when I saw the program for engineering and management or engineering and commerce, I was like, well, okay, so you're telling me I can go and do this in university and I can have an opportunity to go down the engineering path or the business path, but I still might want to be a doctor. So I don't know if I want to go. I think that was what drew me to the engineering and management program. It was like there was still so many options available after you finish it to figure out what you want to do. So I made the basket as big as possible so that during that time I could figure it out. And that's worked to my advantage. And I think I've always done that. I've always tried to make the risk that you're going to take as minimal as possible, but with the ability to have the most payback in the end.
That is a pretty intuitive perspective to have at that age, but it makes so much sense in terms of increasing that size of the net, as you put it. And it kind of shows up in your career a little bit, right? Because you did have a pretty diverse experience with your career, which we'll get into. But I love how you set yourself up for success and to be able to take advantage of different, let's say, disciplines in different organizations in the outset. So I think that's maybe a good bit of advice for people listening right now.
Yeah, I would also like maybe I can add to that. I did always understand though that I had to whatever I did become, I knew that I need to contribute to the economic, you know, output of a society. I think I was always very aware, like, if I buy a if I buy a BlackBerry like where I am right now, someone's going to use that BlackBerry and they're buying it for a price. Like I was always aware, or when I make something, someone's going to be buying that and giving us money for it. I was always aware that, the job that I needed to be was I wanted to be part of a company that was making money. I don't know where that came from, but I did know that being part of something that contributes to society and grows the society, I was always very aware.
And that's a very logical mindset. I know you as a person have a very logical view of things. How do you match that with passion and having interest in something? It's one thing to think, okay, there's an output, I'm contributing to society or the economic output, and therefore maybe my job is safe and that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, when you go to bed at night and you think about things that are important and things that you want to do for yourself, how do you balance that? And is there anything that you've done in your career that scratches that itch in a way?
Yeah, I think some of the like I did that with working. Some of the companies that I did work for were companies that I always had an interest in. When I worked for BlackBerry, I liked it. When I worked, like, I liked the product, I liked what was happening. So I knew I would naturally have an interest when I'm doing the job. When I worked for Ontario Lottery, it was gambling. It's like, wow, I get to help in finance and part of gambling. When I worked in the cannabis industry, this was like the thing that we could never talk about when we were younger. But now we get to talk about it all the time. So I always tried to embed in my career things that I liked as part of my career so that when I get to work, I enjoy it and I like speaking about it.
Right. Makes sense. And I know I was fascinated, like in your role at BlackBerry, we would talk about that quite a bit in terms of the culture that was there. I don't even, if you're in your early adult years right now, I don't know how many of you do know truly what the impact was that BlackBerry had on the, say, the smartphone market. But Tom was witness to the years where it was successful, and the culture. It was Waterloo, right? That it was in, where the facilities
Yeah,
were.
yeah.
Yeah. So going back to just the engineering part of your learnings, when it comes to the intensity. So I was talking with Sergio. He shared the intensity of his engineering program. I hear this a lot, and I know it came up with in our conversations with you. There's often a discussion around the intensity and the grind of the program. What did those years in university teach you about resilience?
Yeah, I think that was, I mean, I would say it was a moment of like, I still remember the first day of engineering. We were in the auditorium and all the students were there, and the dean stood up and he said, "Look to your left, look to your right. Now, I want to tell you that one of those people will not be here by the end of this." And I remember they were actually the two people that were sitting beside me were two people that were from our high school. So I knew both of them, and it was an exact fact. One of them was not there at the end of it. So I
Wow.
think I think it's always, the thing about engineering is interesting. It's like, you know, I never went into it thinking, oh gosh, I'm going to learn about thermodynamics. I always knew that it was more of kind of like discipline, understanding, process, understanding, how to get things done in an efficient way. I mean, that was what you were really learning in the engineering program. It was, they were always piling things onto you because they wanted you to, you know, uh, they wanted you to be in a survival mode, because they know that you can take those tools that you're learning during the process and use it in your life in the future. Now, obviously, there's an academic portion to it. Obviously, there is some person who really likes thermodynamics and is going to learn. But I would say the majority of the people are preparing themselves with tools that they can use in the future for when they go out into the workforce. But everything that's been said about it is exactly true, that it is there's an intensity to it, but there's a way to battle the intensity. And I think it's about figuring it out, not worrying about the end of, oh my gosh, am I one of those people that's not going to be left here? It was more about the process and what do I need to do to survive.
Huh.
I think
And
of it as
and
like I think of it as like academic military, even though I've never been part of the military and I don't think I'd be very good. I think that's what the engineering program was, where I came from, and I've seen that across different post-secondary institutions where they all talk about it's that same intensity that's happening.
it's very similar to like what Navy SEALs would do. Like it's more about like the mental conditioning that you can approach to life versus anything else. And so on that, because you touched on it, like problem solving, systems thinking, just dealing with overwhelm, maybe overload. How has it shaped your approach to life outside of the classroom? You think about raising your kids or just dealing with day-to-day stress. How does it show up today?
Yeah, I think everything everything you do, you apply the principles, whether you see your kids struggling with multitasking. You take the time to say, hey, let's prioritize what is important to you. Even managing, my wife does a beautiful job of managing the calendar. That was a function of when we had to plan our time when we were in school, because we know we can only dedicate this much time to a specific subject here or a specific subject there. All those things come out. And then also there's also the, hey, when you do get some downtime, like in school, well, you enjoy the moment. And I think we've always, when you're not at work and when the kids are winding down, you take the time to enjoy yourself, because you do need to naturally reboot yourself, or you can, there's some relaxation that needs to happen in order for you to go to the next battle.
Right. So you touched on your wife, who is also an engineer. You took
Yeah,
the program together in some degree, right? At the same
yeah,
time. You would have been dating a little bit at that time, if I'm
yeah.
not mistaken. So I'd be remiss not to ask, was there a mutual understanding that each of you have your workloads and, you need to make time for yourself here and there versus, having like a pointed conversation, like these are my goals, these are your goals, let's kind of figure it out. I want to think about maybe two people that are currently in the same situation that you and your wife were, and how you navigated that at that time.
Yeah, I think we were lucky because we were both going through the same thing. So we both looked at each other and were like, "Hey, you do what you got to do to survive, and we'll touch base later." Like, I mean, I think it's different. We're lucky that we were in the same program, that no one knew what the other problem of the other person was. But at the same time, we respected each other, and we both did things differently. I think we both understood, you know, someone might dedicate more time to this specific subject versus the other person would not dedicate it. And we understand that everyone does things differently. Even though we were in the same program, there's many paths to get to the final destination. And we both had an understanding of we're both taking our path, and we might question each other's path, but at the same time, we are all going to reach the same destination. So we respected each other in the way we.
That's really neat. I'm sure it wasn't easy to do at times.
Oh yeah.
So let's go to early career. So you had early roles in manufacturing, supply chain, cost analysis. What did those operational finance roles teach you about how businesses actually work versus maybe how you thought they worked as a kid or young adult growing up?
Yeah, I think coming out of school, I did have an engineering position starting out. I worked in a steel mill. I worked kind of, on the factory, in the factory. You know, what really stood out to me was how important every person was in order to make the product work. The respect that I had for people that were working in, 40-degree temperatures to make steel, or to, if there's an issue at one of the machines that some person had to go fix it. I think that early career for me was understanding that everyone needs to be on the same page in order for it to work. And I think I got a good understanding of that. And I think that would have been different if I, went right into finance. I don't think I would have been able to see how every person is important as part of the process.
Hmm. That's actually really refreshing, especially in a day where AI seems to be encroaching on roles and that sort of thing, with how important people still are in organizations.
Yeah.
So I have referred to BlackBerry and your experience culturally with that organization. What was it like to work for such a fast changing tech company at the time? And then also, because you moved into OLG, what was it like to possibly slow down? I'm assuming that you might have slowed down, but what was it like first to embrace the fast changing pace of BlackBerry and then the transition to OLG?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I mean, I've had the experience, like BlackBerry was a public company. BlackBerry reached, I think, a higher market cap than RBC. At the time, it was one of the I think it was the highest market cap in Canada at the time. I came there at a point when iPhone was like growing like I had never seen. I went there to help them to optimize costs in some of their products, but I realized at that point they were very they were trying to do everything. And I think that's just what, like, because they saw that there was a product out there that was dominating, and they didn't know how to react. And I think it was very interesting to move. It was a fast-paced environment, but one thing I realized that everybody wasn't on the same page. Everyone was all over the place, and there wasn't one single vision. I can even just when I was there, I remember the year they were going to release seven different Blackberries in one year, and all those and they had projections of 100 million people would be using each of these different Blackberries, and everyone in the project management team thought that their Blackberry was more important than the other Blackberry. And when I take a step back and just look at, there was only one iPhone, one product that the entire company focused around, and they built it and they optimized it and they made it the best that it can be. And then I was in a company where they were all reacting, but it was a great opportunity for me to see that. I got to see the buildup of the cost of seven different Blackberries. I got to see how everyone thought that their product was more important. So it was a great opportunity for me, and that was my first finance role. To be part of something where you take some of those lessons that you're learning with your current company, and I was actually looking at the competition and saying, well, what are they doing differently? And I got the chance to see across those two worlds. And then I did go to uh, OLG, which was a slower pace at that time, and it's not like that anymore. Gambling in Ontario was run by OLG, so you really don't have to do anything if you have four casinos in Ontario. People will go to them because there was no online gambling at the time, so it was kind of like money was just coming in, but it was a much slower environment, and you got to see both ends of that, and so it was pretty cool.
And that was a slightly like a unique role for you at OLG. Did you take some learnings from it? I understand like there was I think a bit of a mentor at OLG in a way, no, that you had for a
Yeah,
bit.
I mean, yeah, that was the first time I think I was, you start to have some people there. Like, I think that's the first time that I realized like those mentors are really impact your future. I mean, I think there's a saying that you want to surround yourself with the five people that you want to be. That's where you started. BlackBerry, I mean, sorry, OLG was the first place where, there was somebody that I was looking up to. And I was like, oh, like I like the way you operate. I mean, that's something that I would want to. And I started focusing, when I was at BlackBerry, there was like everybody thought that they were the thing, and you were kind of looking at everybody, and you thought, oh, I'm gonna take a little bit of that person, a little bit of that person, a little bit of that person. When I got to OLG, it was the first time I had somebody where I was like, oh, this person has a little bit of everything that I want, and I started saying, how do I mold myself in that sort of to be that sort of a person?
Oh, cool. And we're gonna put a pin in the mentor thing because I think it might come up a little bit later in your career, if I'm not mistaken, or at least somebody that you're looking up to currently. We may or may not go into that. We'll see. So, what was the with the FP&A? roles in general? Like when did you realize that would be your long-term lane?
I did. I think it was probably when I got to, I think in the roles that I was doing in BlackBerry and at OLG, it was more business unit, business unit focused, where it would kind of be one, there's an overall company and how much they're making, and then there's like five different business units. And I would always be part of a business. I think it was when I got to Husky, I was working at the Consolidated and I at the top of the house, and you were kind of like, oh, I see everything. I like this. I like to be part. I like to see how each of these business units are contributing to the total sum. I think that's when I said, okay, FP&A seems to be the place, which is FP&A meaning financial planning and analysis. Um, that's where I want to make. That's where I would like want to. That's where I see myself going into the
Mhm.
future.
So you refer to Husky. I think you spent around 8 years there. Were there some growth moments or challenges during those years that have shaped your confidence as a leader? I kind of asked that facetiously, knowing a little bit about it, but like, do you think of any challenge? Can you do any challenges or growth moments come to mind that you can share?
Yeah, I think, when I was at BlackBerry, it was a public company. When I went to OLG, it was a government run. And then when I got to Husky, this is private equity. And I remember when I was in the interview, the person told me, hey, just want to let you know this company will be sold within the next 2 to 3 years. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, what does that mean? I didn't really understand what he means. And I never understood, private equity comes in and they'll want to spend maybe 3 to 7 years, do a lot of changes that will make the company look good. And then they want to sell it to the next person. And that was what Husky was. Husky had gone through three different, private equity transactions, each company coming in, trying to do something different with the company in terms of bringing their value to our next level and then selling off. And I think that was where I learned about the intensity of people's jobs were to come in and change the company at a rapid pace to sell it at a higher value. And I think that's where I learned about the intensity of the economic value that some of these companies will bring to the world. And I think that fast-paced environment, but I think the engineering prepared me for that sort of an environment. I think, you got to deal with seasoned, people who have done it multiple times in different companies. And, I think that's where a lot of mentors really started coming out. Like, oh, when I was at Husky, there was, 3 to 5 mentors that I was like, oh, I'd love to be like, I love the way you think. I love the way, you operate. And so you got a chance to be more involved with them and how they think and apply that and use that for your own ammo as you grow in the future.
Hmm. So I'm going to look at it through the lens of somebody just taking on a role, and it's called a scenario for you. So let's say I am 23 and I am, interviewing for a job that has just been taken over by a private equity firm. From my personal experience, when that happened, culturally, the company changed. So I had a bit of a chance to see what the company looked like before private equity and post private equity. And there was a cultural shift, especially as you talk about cost efficiencies and puts and takes around different areas. So if you were to give a little bit of advice in terms of how to approach, it's not neither a great thing or a bad thing. It could be a really great thing in many instances. But in terms of how to approach it as a young adult who may not understand like what being purchased or bought out by a private equity firm means, what kind of advice would you give to somebody like that?
I've always been embrace the change. I'm very big about the vision. And if there is a vision of a company that they want to transform, if everyone is on that same page, it will work. And I think I've referred to it as we've been going through the conversation, So I would say like, don't be nervous, embrace the change. And if you embrace it, you have to believe in it. I mean, that's a piece of it too. But DNA is a huge part of companies, and every company wants to have that DNA that we all think alike. So I would say that as long as you're willing to embrace that change, you will be successful, even though it might be nerve wracking. I mean, If everyone's on that, going down that path, it'll work. And even when it goes back to on teams, if everyone has the same vision to win, and everyone wants to transform the team to something better, you have to want to be part of it.
That's very well put. Okay, so now we're going to look at Organigram really quickly. This was a controversial decision for you, if I'm not mistaken, maybe taking a role in the cannabis industry. You did touch on what cannabis was for us growing up, how it was like a no-no, and then it's legal. Can you walk us through that decision, just for, again, a younger listener who might be considering a career path in this industry or something where it's seen as maybe controversial? What was your decision making process like, and how did you arrive at the decision to actually go work for Organic Run?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a new industry. I looked at it again as it's a new industry. I did know something about it because, as kids, we were growing up, it was always around us. I knew that it would, there's opportunity in terms of, if I think back to where I was in that FP&A space in financial planning, it's an opportunity to put something new in because I knew that they had never had it before. So I thought it was something to, it was a great opportunity for me to develop myself and put me in a situation that was out of my comfort zone. And I think that's what drove me to make the decision. It was something that I would be excited to talk about every day with other people and how we're going to do this and how we're going to get over these, no-nos that you can't do it. I wanted to be part of those discussions as the industry is growing in Canada and will grow in the world over the next 50 to 100 years.
Mm-hmm. I the one thing that you mentioned just now is that you had a certain set of skills, let's say, and they weren't necessarily linear to the industry that you were about to work in, cannabis, and that there's maybe a different frame of thinking that you could be applying just from your past organizational experience. I think that's super important just for people to really listen to is, you may have a set of skills in from university or even early career, but there are transferable skills in other industries that you can consider, and you don't have to stick in one lane. As Tom, we've gone through your career, very different roles, and I'm sure it's made you a better leader and just an overall better contributor to the organization that you work at today.
Yeah, I mean, this will sound funny, but I worked like I said, when I started my career, I worked in a manufacturing, the making of steel. You take what you learned from that, and now you're going to say, okay, I'm going to apply it to the making of cannabis, from the plant all the way to the packaged good. It's a skill that you learned, and whether that be in operations or finance, these are skills that I learned in other industries. You pick it up and you try to apply it to something new, however funny that may sound, but it's the truth. And I think, yeah, you want to take stuff that you've done in the past and apply it in other areas because every area needs those skills.
Yeah. And that's a very good segue into your current role at Atlantic Packaging. Don't want to put you on the spot as senior finance manager, but can you think of a scenario where you've done that very thing, where you've applied thinking or a strategy from a prior role to what you're doing today?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the interesting thing about Atlantic, it's a family run company. So it's kind of my public company, government, private equity, and then there's a family run company. And you can think of it as kind of a mom and it's a mom and pop shop. They haven't gone through the professionalization of processes. They're just about, these companies are just about, they're about survival and making money. And now they're like, okay, let's turn this into processes. And so, I've been able to bring some of the FP&A processes that I've learned in the past and try to apply it to some of the businesses that are having an Atlantic, whether it being purchasing a piece of equipment. In the past, they might have just purchased the equipment, but now let's say, hey, let's do a business case on why do we want to purchase this equipment? What is the value of it in the future? In terms of having a budget and a forecasting process, these Atlantic would never have had that. Now they're saying, okay, let's put a formalized process so you can bring some of those skills, some of those ideas and apply it over to Atlantic. But I think one of the interesting things I found about Atlantic, which is an amazing thing, is having that they have the culture and DNA. Everyone is on the same page, like I talked about. And I feel here it's if everyone is thinking the same and everyone wants to move the company towards the better, it's embedded in the people. So that's been one of the greatest things about working for this company. They haven't, they haven't gone into the public yet where people see them. They're still a family company and there's still one owner. And he has his values and the people of the company try to do those values in order to make the company better.
Awesome. And just for everybody's sake, what's the product that we sell at Atlantic Packaging?
They make boxes. Yeah. So they make boxes and paper bags, but I would say paper products. So it's everything, it's everything that, you can use it in any industry, whether it be from your, beer bottles that are packaged to your diapers that are packaged to your tomatoes that are packaged. It's an industry where they're making boxes, and it's a sustainable process. And I think these were big things as I moved towards that company, that it's something that I see will be here for a long time.
Yeah. I think that's what I love about your career path is like there's no, what's the word, biases towards industries, or it's just what's the opportunity, can I provide value? And I think that's another thing for listeners in terms of like, don't discount an opportunity or a role based on whatever your preconceived biases are of the organization. I would personally assess the culture, and it sounds like where you are at Atlantic has that like 10 out of 10 in terms of culture and the people being on the bus to bring it to a direction. But yeah, I just love the fact that you recognize there's an industry for everything, and it's just a matter of what you can bring to the table and what, of course, what the organization can bring to you as a professional to keep you challenged.
Yeah. And I think that's a very important piece that you just said. It's not what you can bring to the organization, it's what the organization can bring to you. As you're looking through your career, you know, you got to want to work there. And so they got to work to make you want to work there. It's not about you finding a job and do they want to keep you? It's more weighted towards that company and what do they provide for you.
Yeah. So based on these different disciplines and roles, has there been a light bulb moment where your career direction suddenly made sense? Just in as you reflect and think about things, like, do you have a really concrete idea of where you're going 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Or is it
No,
still constantly evolving?
I don't. I think I'm just about having fun. So I mean maybe that's what's giving me, but I don't have a end goal. I just want to be part of something that I can contribute to, that adds value to the society, and that will continue to take me along the journey.
Okay, cool. What's one leadership strength you had as a kid that still shows up today?
I would say there's probably relationships and listening. I think I've had those two have always been. I have the ability to listen to someone and take their information, and I think about the relationships. I'm very good at building relationships with people individually. I always try to find common ground with anybody. I think that might have been going back to like being part of the music and being part of social and in sports. You got to find something that's in common because always find something that's in common, start from there, and then build your relationship.
Amazing. And what is one weakness you had growing up that you've had to outgrow or consciously reshape?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, I'm still working on this, but you can't do it all yourself. I think, you gotta have trust in people. As you grow, you're gonna get teams, and you got to be able to push it down. And I think push it down as well as being able to communicate to the people what the message is, because you all have to be on the same page. I think, yeah, I think you can't do it yourself. That would be the one thing that I still sometimes, I just get something and I'll be like, I'm going to do this because this is the way I want to do it. Involving other people, getting their opinions, letting them help you out. I think that's what makes business successful.
So mastering the art of delegation in a way?
Yeah, I guess you could say that.
Okay. In a good way, not just, what's the word, absolving yourself from responsibility, but like just delegating when you're right.
Delegation is trust, right?
Yeah.
And when you delegate something, you have to have trust in the person that you're delegating. And I think that's a hard thing for a lot of people to get over.
Okay. How, in general, do you stay balanced from a career, family, personal interests compared to maybe how naturally it would have come when you were younger?
I think friendships. I mean, I think we do pretty well in terms of keeping in touch with what's happening. I think doing things that you enjoy, like, I always, because of all the sports we played, I always try to do something, every week that I keep myself going, or, keep, whether it be playing basketball with young 20-year-old kids, just to keep that going. I also think, making sure vacations, and, it's easy not to do that sort of stuff, but when companies give you 3 weeks of vacation in a year, you need to make sure you use those 3 weeks. It's not something that you're like, they're getting you the 3 weeks so that you can not use the 3 weeks, so you can make it seem like you work hard. No, they're there for a reason. And I think you need to make sure that you balance that with your life.
Yeah, I think that's super well put. And I think just from my perspective, having interests outside of work, so your identity isn't completely tied to the work, is super important, because it's
Uh-huh.
almost putting your eggs in one basket. And if your identity comes from the organization, and let's say a private equity firm decides to cut your role, where's your identity? So like having the foundation outside of work is super important.
Yeah, totally. I've seen people who just give their life to career, and then it's not there anymore, and they don't know what to do. And I think maybe that's I was able, as a younger person, I was able to do a lot of things. So I try to keep up with that, doing multiple things, trying out different things, because I think, yeah, you're exactly right that you want to have other things to fall back on, things that you enjoy, hobbies. That's really important.
So if you were to mentor yourself back, like as you were about to go on the journey of university, and were to like, what would you tell you about confidence, career uncertainty, and the pressure to have it all figured out?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, you don't need to have it figured out. It's not about the destination. Like I said, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. I think you need to enjoy the route, but I think you need to think it through. There were some things in my career that I always, like I said, like I was always thinking about the economic, output and what I'm giving to the society. But I would also say, I think you always need, somebody that I look up to always says, compounding is the eighth wonder of the world. And, things that you do, whether it be the smallest little thing to improve yourself, they are valuable. And so I think those are the things you need to, always, compounding is a huge thing. And so things that you can work on in your early career, whether it be forming relationships, whether it be, learning a new, you know, program or something like that, those things are important, and you need to take the time, even though you might not see what the end goal is, as long as it's part of your journey, you know, make sure that you put that as your part of your life.
Well, very well put. Can you give me a moment where life deviated from the plan, and did that deviation end up becoming a strength, or where maybe a time that it ended up becoming a strength?
Yeah, I think, I would say interesting. I think the end, like, doing the engineering thing, that's what I kind of thought I was going to do. And then I realized, oh, but I like finance. I like accounting. Like, I think that switch was a big thing where I went toward that route. But I did have all the, I had all the I had all the background that I could be able to make that switch to go into a purely finance role. I think that's one thing. That's definitely an area where I was able to pivot.
And by the way, we should acknowledge you did obtain your CPA, correct?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. That's an important moment that we kind of skipped over. But during all these roles, Tom managed to find the time to obtain his CPA. Okay.
Yeah,
And which allowed you to pivot.
yeah, exactly.
Which again, I think, just to get another point out there, is it's also something that allowed you to pivot. You did the work in order to make the career move that you wanted to make.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to the basket that I talked about at the beginning. I created a basket that was really big that when I took the shot, it's an easy shot when I chose engineering and management. Because I chose engineering and management, it gave me a couple of those classes in accounting that I might not have thought were important at the time, but I realized when I went to do my CPA, that's what got me into the room, the discussion to do CPA. So
Right.
so it was a very helpful it was a very helpful thing at that moment to choose. I mean, hindsight's 50-50 when you look back on it, but
Yeah. Okay. I got final question. If you were to summarize your journey in one sentence for young listeners, what would the headline be?
I think I might have said this like 5 times, so I feel bad for using this, but it's not about the destination, it's about the journey.
Fair. That's fine. We don't have to be creative. It's this steady theme, I think, throughout the conversation. So
Yeah.
great. All right, Tom, thanks for your time. That's it on Flashback. For those that are listening, I hope you got something from the episode. Look forward to hearing from you. And in the meantime, we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Josh.
As we wrap up, what stands out most to me about this conversation with Tom isn't the resume or the career progression. It's how often the path changed. There wasn't one big moment where everything clicked. There wasn't a perfectly mapped plan. Instead, there were small decisions, calculated risks, skills that compounded over time, and a willingness to stay curious instead of boxed in. If you're listening to this and you're in your late teens or early 20s and feeling uncertain, unsure of your major, your career direction, or whether you're doing enough, I hope this episode reminds you that clarity usually comes after movement, not before. Focus on building skills, protect your interests outside of work, say yes to learning, and remember that your journey doesn't need to look like anyone else's to be valid. Thanks for listening to Flashback Files. If this episode resonated with you, take a moment to reflect, maybe even write down one small thing you can work on that will compound over time. We'll talk soon.